the reader of books. It's a funny thing about mothers and fathers. Even when their own child is the most disgusting little bastard you ever imagined, they still think that he or she is wonderful. Some parents go further. They become so blinded by adoration that manage to convince themselves that child has qualities of genius. Well, there is nothing very wrong with all this. It's the way of the world. It's only when the parents began telling us about the brilliance of their own revolting offspring that we start shouting, "Bring us a base and we're going to the stake." School teachers suffer a good deal from having to listen to this sort of tale from proud parents, but they usually get parent back when it comes to end of term reports. If I were a teacher, I would cook up some real scotches for the children of doubting parents. "Your son Maximilian," I would write, "is a total washout. I hope you have a family business you can push him into when he leaves school, because he sure as heck won't indulge in him anywhere else." Or if I'm feeling lyrical with the day I might write, "It's a curious truth that grasshoppers have their hearing organs in the size of the abdomen. Your daughter Vanessa, judging by what she's learned this term, has no hearing organs at all." I must even deeper in natural history and say the periodical cicadas spent 6 years as a grub underground and no more than 6 days as a free creature of sunlight and air. Your son Wilfred has spent 6 years as a grub in the school, and we're still waiting for him to emerge from the chrysalis. A particularly poisonous little girl must sting me into saying, "Fiona has the same glacial beauty as an iceberg, but unlike the iceberg, she has absolutely nothing below the surface." I think I might enjoy writing an end-of-term report to think of in my class. But enough of that. We have to get on. Occasionally, one comes across parents who take the opposite line, who show no interest at all in their children, and these, of course, are far worse than the doting ones. Miss and Mrs. Wormwood were two such parents. They had a son called Michael and a daughter called Matilda, and the parents looked upon Matilda in particular as nothing more than a scab. A scab is something you have to put up with until the time comes when you can pick it off and flick it away. Miss and Mrs. Wormwood looked forward enormously to the time when they could pick the little daughter off and flick her away, preferably into the next county, or even further from that. It is bad enough when parents treat ordinary children as though they're scabs and bunions, but it becomes somehow a lot worse when the child in question is extraordinary. And by that I mean sensitive and brilliant, and Matilda was both of these things. But above all, she was brilliant. Her mind was so nimble, and she was so quick to learn, that her ability should have been obvious even to the most half of parents. But Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood were both so harmless and so wrapped up in their own silly little lives that they failed to notice anything unusual about their daughter. To tell the truth, I doubt if they would notice that she crawled in the house with a broken leg. Matilda's brother Michael was a perfectly normal boy, but the sister, as I said, was something to make your eyes pop. By the age of 1.5, her speech was perfect, and she knew as many words as most grown-ups. Her parents, instead of applauding her, called her a noisy chatterbox and told her sharply that small girls should be seen and not heard. By the time she was free, Matilda had taught herself to read by citing newspapers and magazines that lay around the house. At the age of 4, she could read fast and well, and she naturally began hankering after books. The only book in the whole of this enlightened household was something called Easy Cooking, belonging to her mother. And when she had read this from cover to cover and learned all the recipes by heart, she decided she wanted something more interesting. "Daddy," she said, "do you think you could buy me a book?" "A book?" he said. "What would I buy a book for?" "To read, Daddy." "What's wrong with a telly, with a sake? With a lovely telly with a 12-inch screen, and now you come asking for a book? You're making a spoil, my girl." Nearly every week that afternoon, Matilda was left alone in the house. Her brother, 5 years older than her, went to school. Her father went to work, and her mother went out playing bingo in a town 8 miles away. Mrs. Wormwood would hook on bingo and played it 5 afternoons a week. On afternoon of the day when her father had refused to buy her a book, Matilda set out all by herself to walk to public library in the village. When she arrived, she introduced herself to the librarian, Mrs. Phelps. She asked if she might sit a while and read a book. Mrs. Phelps, slightly taken aback at the arrival of such a tiny girl and accompanied by a parent, nevertheless told her she was very welcome. "What were the children's books, please?" Matilda asked. "That over there on those lower shelves," Mr. Phelps told her. "Would you like me to help you find all the pictures in it?" "No, thank you," Matilda said. "I'm sure I can manage." From then on, every afternoon, as soon as her mother had left bingo, Matilda would toddle down to the library. The walk took only 10 minutes, and this allowed her 2 glorious hours sitting quietly by herself in a cozy corner, devouring one book after another. Once she had read every single children's book in the place, she started wandering around in search of something else. Mrs. Phelps, who had been watching her with fascination for the past few weeks, now got up from her desk and went over to her. "Can I help you, Matilda?" she asked. "I'm wondering what to read next," Matilda said. "I finished all the children's books." "You mean you've looked at the pictures?" "Yes, but I've read the books as well." Mrs. Phelps looked down at Matilda from her great height, and Matilda looked right back up at her. "I thought some were very poor," Matilda said, "but others were lovely. I like The Secret Garden best of all. It was full of mystery. The mystery of the room behind the closed door and the mystery of the garden public wall." Mrs. Phelps was stunned. "Exactly how old are you, Matilda?" she asked. 4 years and 3 months, Matilda said. Mrs. Phelps was more stunned than ever that she had decided not to show it. "What sort of a book would you like to read next?" she asked. Matilda said, "I would like a really good one that grown-ups read, a famous one. I don't know any names." Mrs. Phelps looked along the shelves, taking her time. She didn't quite know what to bring out. How she asked herself that one choose a famous grown-up book for the 4-year-old girl. Her first thought was to pick a young teenager's romance of a kind that's written for 15-year-old schoolgirls. But for some reason she found herself instantly walking past that particular shelf. "Try this," she said at last. "It's very famous and very good. If it's too long for you, just let me know, and I'll find something shorter, a bit easier." Great Expectation, Matilda read, by Charles Dickens. "I'd love to try it." "I must be mad," Mrs. Phelps thought herself. But Matilda said, "Of course you may try it." Over the next few afternoons, Mrs. Phelps could hardly take her eyes from the small girl sitting for hour after hour in a big armchair at the far end of the room with a book on her lap. It was necessary to rest in the lap because it was too heavy for her to hold up, which meant leaning forward in order to read. And a strange sight it was. This tiny dark-haired person sitting there with her feet nowhere near touching the floor, totally absorbed in the wonderful adventures of Pip, and always with Havisham in her cobweb hat, and by the spell of magic that Dickens' great storyteller had woven with his words. The only movement from the reader was the lifting of the hand every now and then to turn over a page. And Mrs. Phelps always felt sad when the time came for her to cross the floor and said, "It's 10 to 5, Matilda." During the first week of Matilda's visit, Mrs. Phelps had said to her, "Does your mother walk you down here every day and then take you home?" "My mother goes to either every afternoon to play bingo," Matilda had said. "She doesn't know I come here." "But surely not right," Mrs. Phelps said. "I think you'd better ask her." "I'd rather not," Matilda said. "She doesn't encourage reading books, nor does my father. But what do they expect you to do every afternoon in an empty house?" "Just watch around and watch the telly." see. She doesn't really care what I do, Matilda said, a little sadly. Mrs. Phelps was concerned about the child's safety on the walk through the fairly busy high street and crossing of the road, but she decided not to interfere. Within a week, Matilda had finished Great Expectations, which in net edition contained 411 pages. I loved it, she said to Mrs. Phelps. Has Mr. Dickens written any others? A great number, said the astounded Mrs. Phelps. Shall I choose another? Over the next 6 months, under Mrs. Phelps's watchful and compassionate eye, Matilda read the following books: Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens, Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, Tales of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy, Come to Earth by Mary Webb, King by Rudyard Kipling, The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells, The Old Man in the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, By the Sound of the Fury by William Faulkner, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, The Good Companions by J.B. Priestley, Brighton Rock by Grant Greene, Ellen Farm by George Orwell. It was a formidable list, and by now Mrs. Phelps was filled with wonder and excitement, but it was probably a good thing that she did not allow herself to be completely carried away by it all. Almost anyone else witnessing the achievements of this small child would have been tempted to make a great fuss and shout the news all over the village and beyond, but not so Mrs. Phelps. She was someone who minded her own business and had long since discovered it for someone worthwhile to interfere with other people's children. Mr. Hemingway says lots of things I don't understand, Matilda said to her, especially about men and women. But I love it all the same, the way he tells it. I feel I'm right there on the spot watching it all happen. A fine writer will always make you feel that, Mrs. Phelps said. And don't worry about the bit you can't understand. Sit back and allow the words to wash around you like music. I will.